What would you do if you were slapped in a courtroom? Not by a stranger, but by an officer who thought himself untouchable. And you were the judge holding full authority over his fate. This wasn't an accident. It was the first strike against a rotten empire that had silently ruled the city for decades. When two white cops attacked a black woman, they thought they'd just silenced another nobody. They didn't know. That woman was Judge Evelyn Hart. In the next 4 minutes, everything they, and the system behind them, had built began to crack. I see. Have you ever seen a moment that seemed small, but toppled an empire? It was a dreary morning in Riverton, Georgia. Drizzle fell on the granite steps leading to Federal Courthouse No. 9. This was a place where history was often choked by pre-written verdicts. Justice? It usually waited outside the door. In the cold stone hallway, a middle-aged woman's footsteps echoed steadily. She wore no judge's robe, just a simple grey blazer. Her salt and pepper hair was neatly pinned back. She said nothing. Her eyes avoided contact, but each step counted down to an approaching storm. This was Evelyn Hart, a woman the system would soon learn to name with clarity. Courtroom No. 4 was packed. Inside, a 16-year-old black boy, Jamil Ellis, sat trembling beside his public defender. He'd been arrested for graffiti on an abandoned factory wall, a prank, not a crime. Yet here he was, treated like a felon. Across the room stood Sergeant Cole Maddox, the arresting officer, a tall white man with a neatly trimmed beard. His uniform gleamed with medals. His ego? It bowed to no one. No one in that room knew they were minutes away from witnessing an explosion without gunpowder. Evelyn entered quietly, drawing no attention. She approached a table, picked up a file, and scanned the pages. Maddox glanced over, frowning. To him, she was just a court clerk, a black woman, insignificant in his eyes. To men like him, that was enough to justify contempt. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice sharp with authority. Evelyn didn't answer, still reading the file. Maddox's face darkened. He stepped closer, slamming his hand on the table. "I'm talking to you. Didn't you hear me?" No response. Then, crack! A slap echoed like thunder in the crowded room. Time froze. The sound shattered the silence. A reporter nearly dropped their recorder. A young lawyer stood stunned. The bailiff gripped the railing, eyes locked on the man who'd raised his hand. Sergeant Cole Maddox had just slapped a black woman in open court. He didn't even know who she was. Evelyn didn't touch her cheek. She didn't turn away. She didn't make a sound. She simply turned to face him. Her eyes were a mirror reflecting his entire past. Cold, calm, and silently dangerous. Maddox was still panting, his eyes flickering with unease. Deep down, he sensed something was wrong, but his ego wouldn't let fear take hold. "I'm teaching you respect," he muttered, as if convincing himself he'd done nothing wrong. A soft sigh escaped Evelyn. She set the file down and walked slowly to the judge's bench. Every eye followed her, mesmerized. She lifted her judicial robe from its hook, draped it over her shoulders, and fastened each button with deliberate care. Maddox's face drained of color. "You're Judge Evelyn Hart," she cut in. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the room. No one spoke. No one laughed. No one breathed. One question hung in every mind. What happens now? So, the slap still echoed in the air, like a bolt of lightning in a brewing storm. Sergeant Cole Maddox stood brazenly before the woman he'd just publicly humiliated. But in that moment, the only one trembling wasn't the victim. It was him, Judge Evelyn Hart, the woman slapped in front of lawyers, reporters, officers, and the public, ascended the bench. Each step was a blade slicing through the rotten pride of the system Maddox thought would always shield him. No one spoke. Dozens of eyes followed her, as if witnessing a public execution. Evelyn donned her black robe. Slowly, solemnly. She adjusted the collar, smoothed the sleeves, and stood tall in the highest, most powerful position in the room. Just seconds ago, she'd been dismissed as lesser. Maddox took a step back. His eyes betrayed one truth. He'd struck the wrong person, and there was no undoing it. "Sergeant Maddox," Evelyn said, her voice sharp as tempered steel. "Do you know what you just did?" "No, I thought you were," he stammered. "Thought I was a clerk, a black assistant, someone unimportant." Evelyn cut him off, her gaze locked on his paling face. "You don't need to answer. You've already accused yourself." No one moved. The silence was so thick you could hear a pin drop. She turned to the court clerk. "Miss Harper, note in the record, a mid-ranking officer, on duty, assaulted a federal judge during an open session at the bench without cause." She looked back at Maddox, her voice low, but each word like a nail driven deep. "And all of it happened in front of cameras, witnesses, and the press." Maddox flushed, not with remorse, but with fear. "You're making this up," he said, like a drowning man clutching at straws. "I didn't know who you were, and if I weren't a judge," Evelyn countered, her eyes unwavering, "would what you did be legal? Easier to overlook? Something you've done before to people without a voice?" He fell silent. In that silence lay the most damning confession. She turned to Jamil, the boy slumped behind the defense table, eyes wide with fear. Her voice rose clearly. "We cannot lecture a teenager by protecting powerful adults who behave worse than he ever did." Then Evelyn brought down the gavel. "This court is temporarily adjourned. I order an immediate internal investigation into Officer Cole Maddox's assault on a court official." As her words landed, a bailiff stepped beside Maddox, poised to cuff him at any moment. Sweat beaded on Maddox's brow. He looked around, but this time no one saw a hero. A female lawyer in the back row bowed her head, whispering, "This is going to blow up the whole precinct." And it would. What had just happened wasn't a minor offense. It was a spark igniting a pile of rotten straw, the corrupt power structure of an entire system. Evelyn Hart was no victim. She was living proof that when justice is violated, it doesn't whisper. It roars for the world to hear. Dusk! When a powerful person is stripped bare in open court, they don't just lose their title. They lose the mask that kept them untouchable. After the session adjourned, Sergeant Cole Maddox was ordered to remain in the courtroom under the watch of two marshals. His face, once smug and commanding, twisted with shock and rage. But his anger wasn't about being accused. It was about being exposed before the world. For years, Maddox had been a symbol in the Riverton police force, not for integrity, but for dirty connections that shielded him from top to bottom. His father was a retired cop, his brother-in-law, the mayor's aide. Despite 5 lawsuits for excessive force, Maddox climbed the ranks, knowing when to smile and whom to target. He never imagined someone like Evelyn Hart, a black woman in her 50s, once a public defender for the poor, would dare stand against him, let alone strike back with the law. But Evelyn didn't just stand. She began digging his grave. In her chambers, right after the session, Evelyn sat quietly at her desk. She didn't celebrate. She knew the slap she'd taken today was just the tip of a rotting iceberg she'd smelled for years. Bailiff Marcus Reeds, her loyal colleague of over a decade, placed a thick file before her. "This is everything we could pull in an hour," he said, voice low. Evelyn flipped through the pages. A 2012 complaint from a Latina woman alleging Maddox humiliated and berated her in front of her child. It went nowhere. Another page showed photos of a black teenager's injuries after an arrest with no clear cause. The report claimed resisting arrest. No camera, no witnesses, no follow-up. Strangely, all these files shared one thing. They were stamped closed for lack of evidence. "And this," Marcus said, sliding over a photo. It was last year's Riverton Law Enforcement Association dinner. In it, Maddox shook hands with Chief Prosecutor Carson Wells. Next to them stood Senior Judge Franklin Dorr, who'd once denied an appeal for a young man hospitalized after Maddox detained him by mistaken identity.
Evelyn stared at the photo, unblinking. This wasn't just about one cop anymore. It was about an entire network shielding crimes under the guise of justice.
At Riverton's police station, an emergency meeting convened after the slap. Not to investigate Maddox, to control the damage. The internal affairs chief whispered, "If Maddox goes down, he'll drag half of us with him." A deputy director said coldly, "We have two options. Silence her, or bury her in mud." They didn't know Evelyn had waded through deeper swamps than that. That evening, a local news site posted an anonymous article. Judge Evelyn Hart accused of bias in 2004 civil case. No evidence, no sources. Just enough to plant doubt. The smear campaign had begun. Evelyn glanced at the headline on her phone. She wasn't angry. She set the phone down and turned to Marcus. "They've started digging their own grave," she said, "but they forgot I hold the map to their entire graveyard." The next morning, courtroom number 4 was packed twice over. Crowds lined up outside Riverton's courthouse. Media swarmed, lenses glinting. From local reporters to national networks, all waited to see one thing: how the judge slapped in open court would respond.
Evelyn Hart didn't hide. She stepped forward like a warrior. No judicial robe today. She wore a sleek black suit, her shirt buttoned to the top. Each step echoed coldly, steadily, like a metronome waking a system that had slept too long.
The witness stand held neither defendant nor accuser. It held justice, waiting to be named. A special hearing began. A federal judge from Atlanta presided to ensure impartiality. But every eye was on Evelyn, the woman who'd turned a slap into a declaration of war. "Judge Hart," the presiding judge began, "what is your request before we review the formal complaint?" Evelyn nodded. She turned to the crowd, then opened the file before her. "I'm not here just because I was struck," she said, her voice low but clear. "I'm here for those who were beaten worse, wrongfully arrested, silenced more thoroughly, and never given a voice." A reporter raised a camera. The district attorney leaned forward. Evelyn held up a photo. A victim with broken ribs from 2019. Uncooperative. The perpetrator, Sergeant Cole Maddox. "I have 19 complaints against this officer spanning 10 years, Evelyn said. "All dismissed for lack of evidence. And the person signing them off, Assistant District Attorney Carson Wells, sitting right here." A gasp rippled through the courtroom.
Evelyn flipped through the file. A black teenager was held for 72 hours without a phone call. A woman arrested Maddox after accusing him of verbal harassment. A high schooler falsely labelled a gang member to inflate charges.
"I'm not just bringing accusations," Evelyn said, her eyes sharp as a blade. "I'm bringing buried evidence, hidden truths, and victims no one stood for." The dominoes began to fall. In the back, a young lawyer pulled out their phone, texting a newsroom. "Hart's exposing the justice system in court. Need a live stream now." The presiding judge tried to restore order. "Judge Hart, this isn't a hearing about the entire system." "Then that's the problem," she cut in. "We always talk about individual wrongs, never the system that breeds them." The tension erupted. Evelyn set the file down, her gaze piercing Assistant DA Wells, whose face had gone pale. "Mr. Wells," she asked, "can you look at these files and say you're entirely blameless?" Wells shot to his feet. I don't know. So I followed procedure." "Then tell me," Evelyn said, stepping down from the bench. "Why did Maddox's complaint vanish from case 289L? Why did the interrogation room camera fail the day a boy named Jamal suffered a brain injury? And why did you personally sponsor the Riverton Police Association, which funneled legal aid to Maddox?" No answer, just a guilty silence. Live streams began flooding social media. Soon after, anonymous emails hit the court's inbox. One included a 2018 security clip. Maddox shoving a teenager to the ground, then turning to disable the camera. The caption below the video was 3 words. "He still got promoted." The court recessed, but the war had begun. Now, all of Riverton and America watched Evelyn Hart's every move. That morning, Riverton's federal courthouse was no longer a place of judgment. It was a battlefield. Outside, the media formed a wall of pressure. Inside, every glance, every cleared throat, every pen click crackled with fear and doubt. For the first time in years, someone dared shine a spotlight into the darkest corners of a seemingly untouchable power structure. And that someone was a woman. A woman was once dismissed, slapped, and excluded from the feasts of power. A woman who had once stayed silent. Evelyn Hart was silent no more. In the mayor's office, on the top floor of Riverton City Hall, Mayor Wendell Trask slammed a file onto his desk. "She just dragged my entire office into a public minefield," he growled. "Who else here is tied to Maddox?" The room fell silent. The police chief bowed his head. The communications director pursed their lips. The mayor's legal aide winced. "Sir, if she keeps digging up old complaints, it won't just be Maddox. It could be dozens of cases, and many names." "Destroy them," Trask snapped. "Now, wipe the data, smash the drives, burn the office if you have to." In the basement of Riverton's police headquarters, a covert meeting convened. Captain Donnie Hurst, Maddox's direct superior, held a smouldering cigar. "She's digging graves for the whole team," Hurst said, voice heavy. "And if she finds what I think she will, it's not just Maddox. It's me. It's ADA Carson. It's old man Franklin Dorr, all dragged into the open." A young officer spoke up. "So what do we do? Silence her?" Hurst narrowed his eyes. "No, she's not someone you can silence anymore. She's a symbol." A long sigh. "To take down a symbol, you don't shoot at their head. You shoot at the public's faith in them." The information war began. That morning, social media erupted. A splice clip showed Evelyn smiling at Maddox at a ceremony 3 years ago. An anonymous post accused her of bias toward people of color. A boosted status read, "Evelyn Hart is a radical tearing down the police." The posts spread via bot accounts, identical avatars, recycled phrases, all hammering one line. Hart isn't a hero. Hart is a hazard. But they forgot. Evelyn wasn't alone. That night, she received a text from an unknown number. "We're people Maddox wrongfully arrested. If you need witnesses, we're ready." Then an email from a former reporter. "I investigated ADA Carson Wells, but was forced to quit. I have original files." Next, an anonymous ex-IT worker sent a recording of Maddox and Captain Hurst. "Relax, Cole," Hurst said. "If there's trouble, I'll get you a lawyer. No black kid's gonna take me down." The media tide turned. News outlets blared headlines. Why is Evelyn Hart's slap exposing an entire system? Hidden files, Maddox's history, and Riverton PD's protection racket. One slap unearthed 15 years of misconduct. The showdown was official. Evelyn held a press conference. "This isn't personal anymore," she declared to the cameras. "This is a fight for trust. If justice lacks the courage to clean itself, the people will do it instead." A reporter asked, "Are you afraid of taking on the system?" Evelyn didn't blink. "I'm not afraid of the system. I'm afraid of silence." Power is like concrete. It doesn't break instantly. It cracks from within, quietly, in tiny lines. Then one day the whole structure collapses, and no one can brace it. For Riverton's justice system, that day was closer than ever. But City Hall was in chaos. An emergency meeting convened after blistering national news reports. Mayor Trask stood in the boardroom, glaring at a screen dominated by Evelyn Hart's image. "She's burning us all to the ground," he hissed. "And you're just sitting there." The city attorney cleared their throat. "Sir, public opinion is shifting too fast. Even groups that funded Maddox have scrubbed his name from their websites." The communications director, trembling, held up a report. "Dava." Inside Riverton PD, Captain Hurst took a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was ice cold. "You know the game, Donnie," the voice said. "When a pawn starts causing trouble, it's not a pawn anymore. It's a threat." "What do you mean?" Hurst asked. "I mean, Either you cut Maddox loose or the whole board flips and you're swept off with it. The call ended. Hurst stared at his wall of accolades, photos with 3 mayors, award ceremonies, top brass. All had one thing in common. Maddox was always there. Now he was the fuse for an unprecedented reckoning. Cracks spread everywhere. On TV, lawyers who once shook Maddox's hand now condemned his lawless behavior. A lieutenant in his unit resigned, attaching a 7-page whistleblower letter with evidence. Online, old cases resurfaced, dismissed complaints, conflicting testimonies, and lost recordings. Even the newspaper, once funded by the police association, shifted gears. A bombshell headline hit the front page. Maddox isn't an outlier. He's the product of a system that's allowed this for 20 years. Maddox was isolated. He was suspended from duty. His personal bank account was frozen pending investigation. Friends who once shared drinks with him stopped answering calls. His private attorney refused to represent him. Only one person reached out, a shadow, a cleaner. "Cole, you need to disappear from the spotlight," the gruff voice said. "Let this cool off. I'll get you a new SIM and an unregistered car, and a reminder, you owe me." Maddox sat in the dark, each word hammering nails into the coffin of his career. He realized, the ones who protected me, they're more scared of Evelyn Hart than I am. Aho! Power began to shift. In the courthouse, Marcus brought Evelyn news. 3 new witnesses had come forward. One was coerced into a false confession by Maddox. Another was illegally detained for filming police. The third, a former BT officer, had backed up the entire internal affairs database. "Judge Hart," he said over Zoom, "I have videos, recordings, and access logs, and I've got nothing left to lose." Evelyn's response was simple. "Good, because this isn't a game for those afraid of losing anymore. This is for those who've already lost everything. To rise." When the people at the bottom start speaking, the ones at the top start meeting in secret. No more phone calls or cheap threats. Now it was face-to-face behind steel doors, in rooms without cameras, recordings, or trust. Those who thrived on shadow power only survived when the darkness stayed intact. In a riverside mansion outside the city, in a room surrounded by bulletproof glass and walnut furniture, 4 of Riverton's most powerful men sat around an oval table. Mayor Wendell Trask, Chief Justice Franklin Daw, Police Commissioner Lewis Garner, and finally, a man without a formal title, Samuel Rook, the CEO of a private security firm that specializes in crisis management for governments and political campaigns. Samuel placed a thick file on the table. "Here's a list of all the complaints about Maddox, including the ones buried in the hidden files that the court's IT just leaked." No one touched the file. They all knew. Touch it and you'll get blood on it. The only option, cut the branches. Keep the roots, Judge Daw said, his voice weary. "Evelyn isn't in politics. She's seeking real justice. That's more dangerous." Mayor Trask slammed his hand on the table. "So what do we do? Let her bring down the whole system?" Samuel Rook chuckled coldly. "No, we do what wise systems of power always do. Sacrifice a few pieces to keep the board intact." He listed 3 names, Sergeant Cole Maddox, to be taken off the board as soon as possible. Ada Carson Wells should be on leave for health reasons. Captain Donnie Hurst to arrange an honorable transfer out of the media spotlight. "And Evelyn?" Trask asked. Samuel shrugged. "We can't beat her with the law. She is the law. We can't use the media. She's telling the public what they want to hear. So there's only one thing left: fear." The threat was insidious. That night, Evelyn received an unmarked letter left on her doorstep. There was no writing inside. It was just a wooden gavel, identical to a judge's gavel but split in 2. Marcus, her loyal bodyguard, immediately exclaimed, "They're playing psychological warfare." Evelyn remained calm. She said nothing. She just gently wrapped the gavel, put it in a sealed bag, and handed it to Marcus. Send this to the federal forensics team and tell them, I need a list of everyone who has entered the courthouse in the last 48 hours without registering. In the darkness, a final call. In a deserted bar on the south side of the city, a man in a suit and tie sat drinking bourbon. On his phone was only one message. Failed at the legal level, now at the technical level. He typed back, she has a family. The reply, sister, a 10-year-old nephew, Westbrook Elementary. The alliance prepares for a secret war. While Evelyn prepares with documents, evidence, and public opinion, her enemies prepare with maps of her home, her grandchild's school hours, and cameras installed in her mailbox. This war is no longer about who is right and who is wrong. It's about who is strong enough not to fall when everything around them starts to shake. Early the next morning, Evelyn opens the door to her home and stands still. On the steps was a grey envelope. No address, no signature. Inside was a photograph of her 10-year-old nephew standing alone in front of the school. On the back was a single line, stay in your lane. Don't cross the lane. Evelyn's hands shook, not from fear, but from the anger she was choking on. In the office, Marcus immediately increased security. The FBI was called, the school was searched, the boy was sent home in silence. They're warning you, Marcus said. No, Evelyn said. They're forcing me to be silent, but the price of silence is the death of justice. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her office, facing a list of 19 victims who had never been properly tried. She looked at the family photo on her desk. On one side was blood, on the other hand, truth. And she knew the enemy wanted her to choose. Evelyn closed her eyes, then opened them. If they think I'm going to back down, they've never seen a mother stand up for children who weren't hers. Here is part 9, the door that cannot be closed, where Evelyn Hart goes from defense to offense, and once the door of justice is opened, no one can close it again. The next day, during an emergency session at the federal courthouse, Evelyn enters the room with a USB drive in her hand. No gown, no title, just a sharp gaze that cuts through the lies. In front of me, she announces, is a compressed file containing data deleted from the internal complaint system for the past 7 years. The conference room was silent. A USB was plugged into the projector. The screen appeared. 14 complaints about Maddox, once marked, processed, but never investigated. 8 clips deleted from the server, manipulated by an internal IP. And most notably, 2 files with the approval signatures of Ada Carson Wells and Judge Franklin Dorr. An elderly judge asked, trembling, "How did you get these?" Evelyn looked straight. "I didn't. The system created them. I just reopened the door you locked with silence." That afternoon, a copy of the data was sent to the Justice Department. The press was given partial access. The online community was shaken. Television broadcasts live every minute. No one could control the storm anymore. The door could not be closed. As Evelyn left the room, a young journalist shouted, "Aren't you afraid, alone against the system?" Evelyn paused, turned her head, her voice calm but hard as steel. "I am not against the system. I am helping it remember why it exists." Late. Evelyn's office was still lit. On the desk were scattered files, backup drives, import and export schedules. Ms. Marcus's personal secretary, who had just received an anonymous email file from an anonymous investigative reporter. They all had one thing in common. The digital signatures that appeared in nearly 60% of the data loss cases pointed to an anonymous IP address with high-level access but not listed as law enforcement. Marcus frowned. Who else would have that kind of authority if they weren't government employees? Evelyn stared at the code on the screen. She flipped through the old financial records and saw the name, Rook Strategic Security, a private security firm that had been hired to assess internal risks for the city's justice system. The connection was maze-like. The Rook Company had been contracted to consult for the police department, the district attorney's office, and the mayor's office. The CEO, Samuel Rook, a former counterintelligence specialist with a shady record and no public appearances. One of the board members was Franklin Dorr, the sitting Supreme Court justice who had overseen Evelyn's appointment. Evelyn was silent. "Maddox is not the root," she muttered. "He's just the tree that shaded the beast behind." Anonymous call. Evelyn's landline rang. A smooth, soulless, middle-aged male voice said, "You're going too far, Judge Hart, and you know what happens to those who dig too deep." Evelyn didn't answer, just listened, recording. The voice continued. "This city needs stability. Not new blood, not repairs, just order. If you're smart, you'll stop. Tonight." Then silence. Evelyn hung up. No shaking, just wrote a line in her notebook. The last manipulator has finally breathed. Tomorrow she would call a press conference, not to talk about Maddox, but to expose Samuel Rook and those who hide behind the name privatization of public power. 8:55 p.m. Every television station, big and small, had its satellites hooked up to its main studio. On social media, millions were counting down. On a small stage set up in the lobby of the Riverton Federal Courthouse, Evelyn Hart appeared. No judge's robe, no lapel microphone, just a woman with a look that no longer accepted injustice. "I didn't come here with apologies. I came here with the truth," she began, her voice as calm as if she were reading a verdict. Evelyn held up a thin file, a report on Rook's strategic security. "This is the most powerful privatized organization that has ever operated in this city. They don't write the laws, they write the conditions under which they are ignored. They don't wear uniforms, but they dictate who gets arrested and who gets released." Then she read off the names. Cole Maddox, ADA Carson Wells, Captain Donnie Hurst, and Franklin Dorr. The room erupted. Cameras zoomed in. Lights flashed. A few people left. The rest stood. But Evelyn didn't stop. "I know some will say I was disturbing the peace. I wasn't disturbing the peace. I was cleaning up trash. The garbage of silence, of protection, of so-called political stability, but in fact, moral corruption." A reporter raised his hand and asked loudly, "Do you have evidence that Rook directed illegal acts?" Evelyn nodded calmly. "Yes. And tomorrow I will send copies to the Department of Justice, the State Senate, and every independent newspaper in the country." Then she ended with a single sentence which silenced the entire country. "I am not against the system. I want to rebuild it from the foundation." Less than 12 hours after Evelyn Hart's shocking speech, the underground responded like a body being stabbed in the heart. No longer vague threats, no longer anonymous, but official, organized, and extremely vicious action. The next morning, the media's assault began. At 6 a.m., major newspapers ran front pages. Was Evelyn Hart investigated for bias in a 2009 trial? The article was based on an old, blurry, unsigned memo that had been leaked from an anonymous source in the courthouse. At 9 a.m., a clip of Evelyn at a protest 15 years ago was released. A black and white photo of her raising her fist, standing amid a crowd of protesters against the police.
Caption: Judge or radical activist.
12 noon. Her nephew's school receives an anonymous call.
That kid is being used politically. You should check his bag before he comes to class. The government is divided. Mayor Trask goes on television declaring concerns about Ms. Hart's neutrality. The State Judicial Ethics Commission opens an emergency review to evaluate Judge Evelyn Hart's character. Some close colleagues begin to withdraw. Some stop answering their phones. One sends a text message. "Sorry, I have a family." Midnight call Marcus, the loyal bodyguard, has been gone for 30 minutes. Evelyn's phone rings. Unknown number. A familiar, icy male voice. Samuel Rook. "Don't you think it's stupid to stand up to us alone?" Evelyn doesn't answer. Rook continues, steadily. "The system doesn't survive because it's right. It survives because it's familiar. You don't. You make people afraid of the unknown. You think you're a symbol, but we know how to destroy symbols more easily than we can build them." Evelyn put down the phone. Behind her, a pile of files was no longer about Maddox. It was about Rook, Wells, Dorr, Trask, and the dark web of finance that ran through 3 levels of government. She looked at Marcus, who was back with a file from the FBI. "Is there any way to stop them from playing dirty?" he asked. Evelyn replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. "No, but I'll make them blow. Come back to me." In the office, which was enclosed by heavy curtains and an anti-eavesdropping system, Evelyn, Marcus, and an FBI agent, Agent Rosalind Keene, sat around a low table. In the middle of the table was a thin red file, not because it contained little content, but because it contained only a name. Ethan Rook, 28 years old, only son of Samuel Rook. Perfect loophole investigation records show Ethan was a senior technical staff member in Rook Strategic Security's own internal security system. He was the one who wrote the encryption algorithm for the ghost accounts, those who were granted absolute access without being traced. He himself had abruptly left the company a year ago for no apparent reason. He now lives in Bangor, Maine, using a new identity, completely separate from his father. Keene slid the file to Evelyn. "We suspect Ethan fled because of ethical concerns. He may have been the last person to have the original copy of the entire underground backup system before Mr. Rook changed everything." Marcus mused. "So he holds the key to unlocking the Empire?" Keene nodded. "And he may be the only son his father has no control over." An anonymous message. On Evelyn's computer, an email arrived without a sender. "I know who my father is. I also know he won't stop. But maybe you're the first one tough enough to force him to show his face. If you really want to destroy what he built, I hold the key. Don't look for me. I'll look for you." Evelyn read it 3 times. Her eyes stopped at the line. "I'll find you." "He doesn't believe me. But he's watching me," she whispered. Marcus tightened his grip on the chair. "And if he does hand over the original, all the deleted data will be restored line by line." Evelyn stood up. She didn't say a word. She just picked up a blank sheet of paper and wrote exactly 1 line. "They've planted trees on other people's graves. It's time to pull them out." A 3rd-floor apartment in Bangor, Maine. A dim light filters through the sheer curtains. On the oak table, an old laptop, a SIM-free phone, and a cold cup of coffee. Ethan Rook, 28, sits in the shadows in silence. His eyes are glued to the screen where Evelyn Hart's televised speech, in which she calls his father the Architect of Darkness, is playing. He hangs up, takes a deep breath. Memories that never go away. His father's midnight meetings, his clean-up calls, and Ethan's visions of altered data, erased testimony, and temporary evidence. The man with the brain of a monster. But not a monster. Ethan was more than a security engineer. He was the digital heart of the entire information control system in the city. Ethan was the one who designed the Dark Tower, the underground server system that stored copies of every piece of data the Rook Company had ever manipulated. A system that no one knew about, except Ethan. And before he left, he had backed it all up. A new message appeared sender. Anonymous content? They're going to kill her, Evelyn Hart, and if she dies, you're next on the list. Ethan stared at the screen. He knew it was true. He walked to a drawer. He pulled out a USB drive wrapped in thick rubber. He had never intended to make it public. He kept it as a token of his conscience. But now, Evelyn was confronting the entire system, alone, for things Ethan had never dared to say. The first call in a year. "Hello, this is Marcus." "I'm Ethan. Ethan Rook." Marcus was silent for a second. Then he asked, "What are you going to do?" Ethan looked out the window. Snow was starting to fall. "I'm not running anymore. And if they're going to kill Evelyn for the truth, 2 a.m. The special conference room in the basement of the Riverton Federal Building was filled with only 4 people. Ethan Rook, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep, but full of determination. Evelyn Hart sat across from him, her notebook in hand. Marcus stood by the door, his eyes like radar scanning for every sound. And Rosalind Keene, the FBI agent, was setting the computer to network isolation mode to avoid any outside tracking. In the middle of the table was a USB drive labeled T-Root 2.1, a replica of the Dark Tower, the underground server system that Rook's strategic security had used to manipulate data. Ethan took a deep breath. Once we plug it in, we only have a few minutes, because if I designed it as I remember, it will self-destruct in 15 minutes without my own 3-factor authentication. Evelyn nodded calmly. Then let's begin. Decrypting the first layer, the screen appeared. Ethan typed in the first line of code, a biometric encryption string, retina camera, voice recognition. The screen lit up. The folders appeared like newly excavated graves. Suspended cases, camera, erase, requests, judge, override, logs, donor transactions. Evelyn was stunned. There were clues. The defendant, the time, the person who approved the deletion, and the security reason. The truth began to emerge. In judge override logs, Judge Franklin Dorr's name appeared 11 times. Each time it was a case of a reversal after a charitable donation to a bogus scholarship fund. In donor transactions, a list of millions of dollars in payments went into accounts linked to Mayor Wendell Trask's office through a strategic communications firm run by his wife. Marcus growled, "They built a city on lies." Ethan flipped to the last folder. Deleted body cam feeds. He hesitated for a second. Then he typed in the final authentication code. The clip came up, a cop kicking a black teenager to the ground, an ADA standing silently outside, and in the background, Maddox, smiling, nodding. Date, June 17th, 2019. That case was dismissed because there was not enough video evidence. Evelyn stared at the screen without blinking. They didn't erase the memory, they just cut the wires to it. 4 minutes left. Keene pressed save to the external hard drive. The mini-printer started running the preliminary indictment. Ethan stood up. And the second copy? I hid it somewhere he would never think to look. Where? Evelyn asked. Ethan smiled a thin, razor-thin smile. On my phone, but only you can open it. Ethan pulled the plug. The electric fire flared up and the drive burned down on the spot. No smoke, no smell. Only the live data remained, and a list that Evelyn knew would shake the city. The next morning, mails, complaints, and data extracts from the Dark Tower system were sent to the press, the Justice Department, and all the state representatives. The press exploded. Franklin Dorr, ADA Wells, Mayor Trask, and the top brass were all on the list. On the top floor of a glass building that housed Rook's strategic security, Samuel Rook sat motionless. He didn't scream. He didn't bang on the table. He just stared at the screen, where 3 words were clearly displayed. The assistant rushed in. "Boss, the FBI is on its way. Some high-profile clients have cancelled their contracts. The press is digging into the financial records, and Ethan is at the federal courthouse." Samuel stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "So, it's time to play the final card." The plan was codenamed Grey Zone, a special room on the bottom floor that only Rook had access to. Inside was a standalone server that contained an emergency program. Codename Greyfall Protocol, a program to erase all incriminating data from the system by activating a cyber attack against the state government's security center. Just one command. All the truths would disappear again. But this time, forever. He reached for the keyboard. A voice echoed in his head, Ethan's voice as a child. "Dad, why do we have to erase what doesn't suit us?" "Because this world is not for the weak, son. Just as he was about to press the Y key, a message popped up on the secondary screen. Sender. Greyfall was disabled 7 hours ago. By Ethan Rook himself. Samuel's eyes twitched. At this moment, in the press room, Evelyn Hart appeared on the live television screen. The indictment from the light side. Samuel Rook was more than a businessman. He was the architect of a system of shadow power where the law was sold, justice was killed, and people were programmed as data. And today, with the evidence of the son he wanted to make a clone of himself, we indict him on 12 federal counts. At the Rook building, Samuel looked out the window. The sound of helicopters began to echo in the distance. The police sirens wailed in waves. He did not run. He just poured a glass of whiskey. He stared at the cloudy sky. You think you can break Rook? You only cut off the head of the snake. But its blood has soaked into every brick of this city. Cell. Noidaru. 6 Federal Detention Center, Basement C. No cameras, no microphones. A grey steel room where Samuel Rook sat, his hands locked in handcuffs from both sides, not because of the risk of escape, but because the government didn't want him to touch anything. The door opened. Ethan walked in. No armor, no FBI, just a son, walking in to see his long-dead father, even though he was still alive. Samuel didn't look up. What are you here for? To see your father being torn apart like a circus animal? Ethan sat down in the chair opposite. His eyes didn't leave him. No. I came to see clearly who taught me to program a closed system to hide the truth, and who, in their entire lives, has never known what the truth is? Samuel curled his lips. The truth is the weakest thing in the world. A number, a line of code, or a line of money can change any sentence or any definition. Don't you understand yet? Ethan replied, not angrily. No, I understand. And because I understand, I stopped. And you traded your soul to maintain a hollow empire. Unnamed memories. Ethan remembered his childhood days sitting behind his father in meetings. His father did not teach him how to live. He taught him how to win. Winners don't have to be right, they just don't get caught. But kindness is what makes people take advantage of you. Power is not in guns, it's in who controls gun laws. Now that teacher sat before him, bound by the same rules he had once twisted. Ethan exhaled slowly. Dad wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I cannot inherit a legacy built on blood, fear, and disappearances, Samuel growled. And now you stand with those hypocrites? Do you think justice really exists? Ethan was silent for a few seconds. Then he replied, I stand with no one. I stand with those who can no longer speak, because they were once like me. The final conversation. Ethan stood up. He placed a stack of papers on the table. Not a verdict, but a handwritten copy of his mother's letter, who had died when he was a child. Samuel glanced at it. His eyes flickered. She believed that Dad would change if he saw his own son confronting him one day. Ethan walked out the door. Before leaving, he turned back. Today, Dad proved Mom wrong, and I will prove her right by rebuilding everything. The door slammed shut. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the cold hallway. What remained was a lonely father sitting in silence. No more followers, no more ideals, only lonely code and a child who chose the opposite. Here is part 18, the second wave, where every victory is not final, and every villain falls only for cleaner hands to rise and inherit the throne of power. A week after the indictment of Samuel Rook. The press called it the historic purge. 14 officials resigned. 7 officers were arrested. 3 prosecutors' offices were sealed. Evelyn Hart, Ethan Rook, and Agent Keene became symbols of new justice. But, in a quiet cafe in the old town of Riverton, Ethan sat brooding over a cup of black tea. Marcus walked in, setting down a thick file. Breaking news. Someone is buying up Rook's strategic security contracts, but not under the old name. using a series of shell companies. Ethan opened it. The new logo appeared, Argent Vector Solutions, a name he had never heard of. But behind it were shareholders who had been tied to his father's old organization. Cut off the head, but not the stinger. Keene stepped in, his voice low. Argent Vector has won a $200 million contract with the Department of Internal Affairs in just 6 days. Their sponsor is a senior government advisor who was once an ally of Mayor Trask. Evelyn arrived last, carrying a classified report. They don't need to stay in power, they just need to change shells. Rook fell, but the control ideology is still intact. And now we face a more sophisticated version, less deadly, but more dangerous. The empty chair and the sweet invitation. A few days later, Evelyn received a nomination from the governor. We want you to be Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. The room was silent as Evelyn reread the invitation. A quiet clause was added. We expect you to maintain stability. Don't let the purge go too far. Marcus whispered, they want you to stay put on a throne and chained in gold. Evelyn folded the letter. We haven't won. We're just in the second round. An unusual signal. Ethan was now in a federal data center where he stumbled upon a backup copy of the data, hidden inside a server that had been thought to be offline. In it, there were no old documents. There was a list of people who were being soft-tracked: journalists, activists, lawyers, and Evelyn Hart. Ethan was speechless. They don't need to control justice. They just need to control who defines justice. Late at night, on the roof of an old building overlooking the city, Evelyn Hart stood still, her eyes on the lights of City Hall, which had just enacted a policy of limiting the scope of federal investigations after Operation Rook. Marcus approached, handing her a small device. New order from the Judicial Council. No further release of data related to current officials. They use the excuse of social stability. Evelyn smiled faintly. The so-called stability always comes from those who are in power. Ethan, the guardian of the underground. In a secret underground database, Ethan had secretly set up the Lighthouse, a non-governmental encryption system that specializes in collecting falsified documents, protecting anonymous sources, and responding immediately if there are signs of editing official facts. The Lighthouse is not affiliated with any agency. It is a vital warning to those who do not want the truth to be distorted again. Keene joined the first advisory board. She came up with a list of 23 journalists, 17 lawyers, and 6 retired judges, all of whom had faced Rook and survived. We don't need a noisy revolution, Keene said. We need a fence around what's right, and it has to be built of stone, not paper. The first warning. A journalist named Alina Chen, a member of Lighthouse, discovered an anomaly. A corporation called Argent Vector was secretly controlling the public security data storage service. She sent a message to the internal system. They're not rebuilding the empire from the ashes. They're just changing its uniforms. The call from the anonymous. That night, Evelyn received a call from an unknown number. The man's voice is deep, strange, but full of information. You are entering uncharted territory, and if you do not stop, you will not only be erased, you will be written off as a traitor. Evelyn replies, as long as the truth is on paper, I am the judge. But if they tear up the paper, I will carve it in stone. A new, uncontrollable network. At the end of this section, Ethan activates the first feature of Lighthouse. Mirror mode. Every time a piece of data is altered by government intervention, it will show the original on thousands of volunteer servers around the world. Unable to turn it off. Untraceable. Undeniable. December 3rd. The Lancaster State Capitol is packed. The special hearing is broadcast live nationwide. Evelyn Hart sat in the middle of the questioning, this time not as a judge, but as an official whistleblower, confronting the system that was trying to erase her victory. Opening statement, Sir. I'm not here to tell a story. I'm here to mark the end of a chapter that you've tried to hide under the floor. Evelyn placed a thick file of documents from the lighthouse system on the table. Inside were Argent Vector's transfer records to Government Council, revised indictment records for sitting officials, and a recording from 3 days ago proving the bargaining between the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and Vector's representatives. Ethan was watching remotely via a special live stream he had set up. The lighthouse system had just sent out a notification. 3 copies of the data have been intercepted, but 28 copies have been spread across 12 countries. The fight was no longer limited to the state. The final confrontation. A council member stood up and growled, "Ms. Hart, you are undermining the credibility of the judiciary and undermining public confidence." Evelyn interrupted. "Undermining confidence? No. I am removing the masks from those who use their reputations to hide their crimes." She held up a detailed list, the names of 9 prosecutors, 4 sitting judges, and a former member of Congress who had awarded Evelyn a Medal of Honor in 2017. No one sat still. The price of light. After the hearing, Evelyn was suspended from practicing law, citing data breaches and breaches of confidentiality. The media was divided. One side called her the traitor in black. The other called her the last person to break the mask. That night, Ethan returned home to a text message from the mother of a former victim. "My daughter is not coming back." But Ms. Hart did what no one else would. Prevented her death from being classified as hard to handle. Her closed, but not finished. The following week, graffiti across the city read, "She is forbidden to speak, but we are not." Lighthouse continued to operate quietly but extensively. Ethan, Marcus, and Keane were no longer in government, but each had become a link in a new network, nameless, centerless, unstoppable. The last word. On her personal blog, Evelyn wrote, "They can take away my title, but they can't take away the truth I spoke. And if the old bells of justice have fallen silent, then we will forge new ones, stronger, sharper, and louder." This was not just a story about a cop who slapped the wrong guy. It was not just a confrontation between a corrupt father and a son who dared to turn the tables. It's not just a shocking court appearance to expose every single person who sat high and bowed to the power. This is the story of what every system fears most. Someone who was once inside, daring to step forward and tell the whole truth. Evelyn Hart lost her seat. Ethan Rook lost his name, and Marcus lost his badge. But what they won back was the right to light up a room that had been dark for too long. No slap is too small if it echoes in silence. And no system is strong if someone stands up and rings the bell. If this story makes you think differently about justice, share it. If you believe that the truth is still worth it, keep it alive. Because somewhere, between the darkness and the light, there is someone like Evelyn waiting for us to speak.